Mara had always been tall, so tall, that strangers often stopped and stared without even trying to hide it. Since childhood, she had lived in a world built for people much smaller than her. At 6'9", she had to duck under doorways, bend down to hear short counters, and sit carefully on fragile chairs. But the hardest part wasn't the daily inconveniences. It was the way people treated her. Some were curious, some were rude, and some acted as if she was not a normal person but something unusual to be whispered about. So when she arrived in the small desert town of Larkspur, she was already prepared for the looks she would get. She expected it. She was used to it. But that didn't mean it hurt any less. Larkspur was a quiet place, dusty streets, a single grocery store, and a few shops that closed early. The sun was harsh in the afternoons, and the evenings smelled of warm sand and sagebrush. Mara came there because she wanted peace. She wanted a place where no one knew her past, where she could start fresh without the weight of old memories. But on her first day, as she walked down the main street with her small suitcase, she felt the familiar prick of attention. People paused mid-conversation. A woman filling her truck with gas slowed her movement. A group of older men outside the diner stopped their quiet chat and watched her carefully. Mara lowered her eyes and kept walking. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want questions. She just wanted to get to the boarding house where she had rented a room. When she reached the front steps, she paused to wipe sweat from her forehead. The desert heat didn't forgive anyone, not even someone as strong as her. She took a deep breath, lifted her suitcase again, and climbed the stairs. The owner of the boarding house was Mrs. May Turner, a lively woman in her 60s with quick eyes. She had seen all kinds of people in her long life, and nothing surprised her anymore. Except, maybe, Mara. Mrs. Turner blinked when she first saw her. She wasn't rude, but she didn't hide her surprise either. "Well now," she said, "you must be Mara." Her voice was warm, and that small detail relaxed Mara more than she expected. "Yes, ma'am," Mara answered softly. She had learned to speak gently so people wouldn't think she was trying to intimidate them. Mrs. Turner nodded, stepped aside, and welcomed her in. Mara had to duck as she entered the doorway. She saw Mrs. Turner notice it, but the older woman said nothing. She simply walked ahead, giving Mara space. Upstairs, the room was small but tidy. A single bed, a wooden dresser, a window, looking out over the dusty street. Mara was used to small rooms. She always adjusted. She always found a way. "You'll be staying for a while?" Mrs. Turner asked politely. Mara hesitated. "If that's all right. I'm looking for work." "Well, Larkspur could use a few more hands around here," Mrs. Turner said with a smile. "People work hard, but we're always short on help. You won't be idle." That comforted Mara. She liked working. Work didn't judge her, didn't whisper, didn't stare. After Mrs. Turner left, Mara sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. She saw the town moving at its slow pace. A pickup truck rumbling past, a kid riding a bicycle, a dog wandering lazily across the street. It was the kind of quiet she had been craving. Still, she felt alone. She had always felt alone. Later that same day, when the sun began to set and the sky turned gold and purple, Mara decided to walk a little. She needed to stretch her long legs after sitting so long on the bus. She needed to clear her mind. She followed a narrow dirt road that led out of town. The desert stretched wide and open around her. The land glowed softly under the evening light. She breathed in deeply, letting the dry air fill her lungs. It felt clean, simple, honest. That was when she saw him. A man on horseback slowly approached from the distance. The horse was a dusty, brown, calm, and steady. The rider wore a worn hat, boots covered in dust, and a faded shirt that looked as though it had been through many long days of work. He rode with the ease of someone who belonged to the land. As they came closer, Mara felt a familiar tension rise in her chest. Men were often the ones who stared the hardest. She prepared herself for the usual reaction. But the cowboy did not look surprised. He did not stare like she was something strange. He simply slowed his horse, gave a polite nod, and said in a quiet voice, "Evenin'." Mara blinked, unsure how to respond. "Evening," she finally said. The man studied her face. Not her height, not her body, just her face. His eyes were gentle, tired in a soft way, like someone who had carried many silent worries. "You must be new in town," he said. "Yes," Mara replied. "Just arrived today." He nodded once more. "Hope Larkspur treats you kind." That simple sentence, spoken without judgment, warmed her in a way she didn't expect. Most people commented on her size first, or they asked questions she didn't want to answer. This man didn't do either. He treated her like a normal person. "I'm Eli," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Mara," she answered. Eli glanced toward the horizon, where the last bit of sun dipped under the land. "It gets dark quick out here. Roads are safe, but watch your step. Rattlers wake up at night." Mara gave a small nod. "Thank you. I'll be careful." Eli looked at her once more. Not curious, not judging, just noticing. "Well, if you need anything, the ranch is west of here. Old Calder Place. Folks in town can point you if you forget." She didn't know what to say. Nobody had offered her help this quickly in a long time. "Thank you," she said again, because she truly meant it. With that, Eli gently guided his horse forward. He didn't linger, didn't question, didn't stare. He simply moved on, riding slowly toward his ranch. Mara watched him go. There was something different about him. Something calm, something steady, something she couldn't quite describe. She stood there a long moment, feeling the desert wind brush against her hair. The sky darkened above her. The first stars appeared. For the first time in a long time, she felt something small but powerful, a spark of hope. Over the next few days, Mara tried to settle into life in Larkspur. She found odd jobs at the grocery store, the laundromat, and the small cafe. People still looked at her with curiosity, but the stares were fewer than she expected. Maybe because Larkspur was the kind of town where everyone already had enough to worry about. Maybe because Mrs. Turner spoke kindly of her. Or maybe because word traveled fast about the tall newcomer, and once people had time to whisper among themselves, they moved on. But she couldn't stop thinking about Eli. She saw him again 3 days later. This time, he wasn't on horseback. He was buying supplies at the hardware store, loading heavy bags of feed into the back of his truck. Mara happened to walk past the shop at that moment. He noticed her immediately. "Afternoon, Mara," he said with a small smile. She stopped, surprised again that he remembered her name. "Afternoon. You settling in all right?" he asked. Mara nodded. "Trying my best." Eli lifted another heavy bag with ease and tied it securely. "Town's quiet. Takes a while to get used to it." "I like quiet," Mara said, almost whispering. "Too much noise feels like pressure." Eli understood that without needing her to explain. "Yeah," he said softly. "Quiet has its own comfort." Their conversation was simple, but it felt natural. It felt easy. Mara wasn't used to that. Most people made her feel like she needed to shrink, to make herself smaller, to avoid taking up space. But Eli didn't make her feel that way. He seemed comfortable around her, as if her height didn't bother him at all. When he finished his loading, he closed the truck's tailgate and wiped his hands on his jeans. "If you ever looking for more steady work," he said, "the ranch always needs help. Not fancy work, but honest." Mara hesitated. She wasn't afraid of hard work, but she didn't want to be a burden. "Are you sure?" Eli nodded. "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." There was something so straightforward about him, no games, no hidden intent, no discomfort, just simple honesty. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. "You do that," he replied. Then he tipped his hat, got into his truck, and drove away. Mara stood there long after the sound of the engine faded, wondering why she suddenly felt lighter, as if the weight she usually carried had shifted just a little. In a town where she expected to remain invisible or misunderstood, Mara had met someone who didn't look at her like she was different, and she couldn't help but wonder what that might mean for her new life in Larkspur. Mara never expected her life to change so quickly. But the days in Larkspur moved in quiet, steady waves, and eventually she found herself drifting into a routine she had never known before. People in town were beginning to recognize her, and though they still looked twice when she passed, the looks were no longer sharp with surprise. Some even greeted her politely. Some smiled. Some asked small questions, like how she liked the town, or if she needed directions. But the person who stayed most clearly in her thoughts was Eli. After their second meeting at the hardware store, he became a quiet but steady presence in her new life. Some mornings, when she left the boarding house early, she would see him riding into town for supplies. He always greeted her with a soft, "Morning, Mara," and she always replied with a small nod, though inside her chest something warm and unfamiliar would stir. Eventually, she accepted his offer to help on the ranch. It happened on a warm Thursday afternoon. Mara had finished her shift at the cafe, wiping tables and lifting heavy boxes of produce for the kitchen. She was leaving when she saw Eli leaning against his truck, waiting in that patient way of his. "You free right now?" he asked simply. Mara hesitated. "I think so." "Good," he said with a brief smile. "I could use another pair of hands on the ranch. Only for a few hours." Mara could lift more weight than most people expected, and she was grateful when someone recognized her strength instead of fearing it. So she nodded, and they drove together to the Calder Ranch. The land was wide and open. Old fences stretched across the fields, and a barn stood tall against the clear sky. The ranch house was small and weathered, but it looked cared for. Eli parked the truck near the barn and hopped out. Mara followed, feeling both nervous and curious. Eli didn't treat her like a stranger. He explained the work step by step, pointing to the tools and showing her how things were done. Mara listened carefully. She always took instructions seriously, afraid of making mistakes. "You're doing fine," Eli said gently whenever he saw her worry. "Just take your time." It surprised her how patient he was. By the time the sun dipped low, they had repaired a broken section of fence, stacked several bales of hay, and cleaned part of the barn. Mara was sweating, tired, and strangely happy. Working beside Eli felt natural, like they understood each other without needing many words. When it was time for her to leave, Eli drove her back to town. The truck rattled a little on the dirt road, and Mara sat quietly, looking out at the reddening sky. "You did good work today," he said. Mara glanced at him. "Thank you for trusting me with it." Eli kept his eyes on the road, but smiled faintly. Trust isn't hard when someone shows they deserve it. His words stayed with her long after she returned to her room. Days turned into weeks, and Mara continued helping on the ranch. Sometimes it was just small tasks, feeding the animals, clearing brush, organizing tools. Other times, it was heavier work. No matter what they did, Eli always worked beside her, treating her not like someone unusual, but like someone reliable. Slowly, Mara began to open up. At first, she only talked about simple things, the weather, her work in town, her favorite foods. But Eli listened so sincerely that she found herself sharing more than she expected. "I moved a lot growing up," she told him one evening while they fixed a loose gate. "People always stared at me. I never stayed anywhere long." Eli tightened a bolt and nodded. "Must have been hard." "It was," she admitted quietly. "But I got used to being alone." Eli didn't speak right away. When he did, His voice was soft. Being alone isn't something people should get used to. Mara thought about that all night. What she didn't know was that Eli carried his own loneliness. The Calder Ranch had once belonged to his family. His father, his brothers, all of them working together. But life had taken them in different directions, and one by one they left, leaving Eli to keep the ranch alive. He didn't talk about it often, but Mara could see the tiredness in his eyes, the kind that grows from years of quiet work and quiet sorrow. Maybe that was why they understood each other so easily. Two people who had spent too long living on the edges found someone who didn't make them feel strange or out of place. As the months passed, the townspeople began to notice something between them. Something gentle. Something growing. They saw the way Eli's eyes followed Mara when she walked by. They saw the way Mara smiled a little more when Eli was around. They whispered softly, not unkindly, wondering how long it would take before the two admitted their feelings. But Mara didn't believe someone like Eli could love her. She told herself he was kind to everyone. She told herself he was just being friendly. She told herself she shouldn't hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope had disappointed her too many times. Things changed one cool autumn evening. They had spent the day clearing the field behind the barn. The sky was turning pink, and a gentle breeze rustled the dry grass. Mara was gathering tools when she realized Eli was watching her, not staring, not judging, but looking at her with a softness she had never seen in someone's eyes before. "Mara," he said quietly, walking closer. "Can I tell you something?" She swallowed, and suddenly nervous. "Of course. I know you've had a hard life. I can see it in how careful you are with every word, every step." His voice was calm, steady. "But I want you to know, you don't have to be careful around me." When the pension, her breath caught. "What do you mean?" Eli stepped a little closer. "I mean that I care about you. More than just as someone who helps on the ranch. More than just a friend." Mara froze. No one had ever said those words to her. Not with that kind of honesty. Not with that kind of sincerity. She lowered her gaze. "Eli, I'm not used to." "I know," he said gently. Silence settled around them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the moment before a door opens, a quiet, trembling pause. "I don't want to pressure you," Eli continued. "I just want you to know how I feel. That's all." Mara didn't speak for a long time. Her heart felt heavy, but in a new way, an overwhelming, aching softness. She finally lifted her eyes to meet his. "I care about you too," she whispered. A slow, relieved smile spread across Eli's face. He nodded, as if he had known, but didn't dare believe it, until now. After that evening, something shifted between them. They didn't rush anything. They didn't change overnight. But the air between them was warmer, clearer. They walked closer together. They talked longer. They shared more. One evening, after helping Mrs. Turner with the boarding house repairs, Eli asked her quietly, "Would you like to walk with me?" Mara nodded. They walked through the quiet town, listening to the soft whisper of the desert wind. When they reached the edge of town, where the land stretched wide and the stars shone brighter, Eli stopped. "There's something else I need to say," he told her. Mara's heart thumped. "I've been alone on that ranch for a long time," he said. "Long enough to know the difference between comfort and love. And I know this." He looked at her, steady and sure. "I love you, Mara." The words hit her like the first warm day after a long winter. Her eyes filled with tears not from sadness, but from the shock of feeling seen, truly seen. "I don't know how to be loved," she whispered. "That's all right," Eli said softly. "I'll guide you." That promise, spoken with such quiet certainty, changed everything. They stood together in the desert breeze, two lives finally no longer alone. And though Mara had never imagined that someone could love her, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved it. After Eli confessed his feelings, life in Larkspur changed for Mara in ways she never expected. She woke up each morning feeling lighter, like the air around her had grown softer and less heavy. For the first time in her life, she wasn't carrying her burdens alone. She wasn't walking through the world as a shadow or a stranger. Someone saw her, really saw her, and didn't turn away. Her relationship with Eli grew slowly, naturally, like the desert plants that bloomed even in harsh weather. There was no rush, no pressure, no demands from him. Instead, there was patience, steady, gentle patience that made her feel safe. But new things, even good things, can bring their own kind of discomfort. Mara had never shared her life with someone before. She didn't know how to let someone close without feeling afraid. She wasn't used to receiving kindness. She wasn't used to being held in someone's thoughts. And most of all, she wasn't used to trusting that people meant what they said. So even though she cared deeply for Eli, she moved carefully, like someone stepping across thin ice, unsure if it would hold. Eli understood. He didn't ask her to change. He didn't ask her to hurry. He simply made room for her in his life. One small piece at a time. Every morning, he saved a cup of coffee for her on the ranch, in case she decided to work that day. Sometimes she came, sometimes she didn't. But the cup was always waiting. In the evenings, he walked her back to the boarding house, even though it added extra time to his day. When the townspeople asked if they were together, Eli never hid it. He just smiled politely and said, Mara admired his openness. She wished she could be that confident. One afternoon, as they were repairing a wobbly fence post, Eli noticed she kept glancing at the ground, avoiding his eyes. Something on your mind? He asked gently. Mara swallowed. I'm trying not to mess this up. Eli paused his hammering and turned to face her. Mess what up? This. Us. She gestured weakly, unsure how to explain. I don't know how to be in a relationship. I've never been close to anyone like this before. I worry I'll disappoint you. I worry I'll make a mistake. Eli leaned on the fence, calm as always. Mara, listen. His voice was steady. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to be perfect. We'll learn together. Her eyes softened. You think so? I know so, he said. And he meant every word. That simple assurance filled her with courage. Not the loud, bold kind of courage, but the quiet, steady kind that grows slowly, like warm sunlight rising over the desert. As weeks passed, Mara began to relax around him. She laughed more. She talked more. She let herself be honest. She didn't shrink or hide as much. She walked into rooms without hunching her shoulders, and Eli noticed the way she stood taller, not just physically, but emotionally too. One evening, after finishing the day's work, Eli invited her to stay for dinner at the ranch. It was nothing fancy, just soup, bread, and leftover vegetables, but Mara felt shy about eating in someone else's home. She had rarely been invited to meals. Not because she wasn't welcome, but because people rarely saw her as someone they could easily include. Still, she accepted. The ranch house felt warm, lived in, and full of quiet memories. Family photos hung on the walls, Eli with his brothers, his parents, and a few old dogs that must have lived long before Mara arrived in Larkspur. The furniture looked handmade and old, each piece telling its own story. Eli handed her a bowl of soup and gestured for her to sit at the small wooden table. Hope it's not too simple, he said. It's perfect, Mara replied. They ate quietly at first, comfortable in the silence. Then Eli started telling stories from his childhood. Funny ones, embarrassing ones, stories about falling off horses and breaking windows. Mara listened with soft laughter, finding joy in his memories. Did you ever get into trouble? He asked her, with a teasing smile. Mara hesitated. No. I mostly stayed alone. Eli's smile faded, replaced with a gentle expression. I'm glad you're not alone now. Her heart warmed. Me too. After dinner, they walked outside and sat on an old wooden bench near the barn. The sky was full of stars, clear and quiet. Mara looked up at them, feeling small in a peaceful way. Do you miss your family? She asked softly. Eli rested his hands on his knees. Sometimes, he admitted, but people grow apart. That's just life. He turned toward her. I guess I stayed here because someone needed to take care of this land, and it became home. Mara nodded. I never had a place that felt like home. You do now, Eli said gently. Or at least, you're building one. His words made her chest tighten not with fear, but with emotions so deep she didn't know how to speak. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Eli understood her silence, better than most people understood her words. As their relationship grew stronger, Mara faced new challenges. People in town began asking more questions. Some were kind, others curious. A few wondered how someone like Eli, a respected rancher, had fallen in love with someone as unusual as Mara. Those whispers sometimes reached her ears. They stung, even when she pretended not to hear them. One morning at the cafe, two women sitting near the counter whispered loudly enough to be heard. She's too different for him, one said. He deserves someone more normal, the other added. Mara's cheeks burned. She lowered her eyes and continued cleaning the table, pretending she didn't hear anything. But inside, the old familiar ache returned, the fear that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't belong. When Eli came to pick her up later, he immediately noticed her sadness. What happened? He asked. Nothing important, she said, brushing it off. Eli placed a gentle hand on her arm. If it bothers you, it's important. Mara sighed. Some people in town, they think you shouldn't be with me. Eli's eyebrows lowered slightly. And what do you think? She looked up at him. I think I'm afraid they're right. Eli shook his head firmly. Mara, people will always talk, but they don't know you like I do. They don't see your strength, your kindness, your heart. They don't know the work you do, or the way you care. They only see what they want to see. But what if I make your life harder? She whispered. Eli took a deep breath. You don't make my life harder. You make it better. Those words washed over her like warm rain. Slowly, Mara began believing them. As the days rolled into weeks, and the weeks into months, their relationship deepened. They worked side by side on the ranch, fixing fences, caring for animals, clearing brush. They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments watching the sun set behind the desert hills. They grew together, learning the rhythms of each other's lives. Mara learned that Eli liked his coffee strong, but only half a cup. She learned he hummed softly when he worked. She learned he spoke gently to animals and treated everyone with respect. Eli learned that Mara loved reading old books, that she liked sitting near windows, that she had a soft laugh she rarely showed anyone but him. He learned that she wasn't fragile, not at all, but she had a heart that needed patience and care. One cool evening, when the sky glowed with the fading colors of dusk, Eli stood with her outside the barn. The breeze was soft, carrying the scent of hay and earth. Mara, he said quietly. She looked up at him. I don't want you to feel like you're walking through life alone anymore, he said. If you'll let me, I want to be by your side. Her throat tightened. I want that too, she said softly. I'm still learning. That's all right. He smiled. I'll guide you. Mara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of relief, not hurt. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the future. She wasn't alone. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't strange. She was loved, and she was learning slowly, gently, how to love in return. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. like a quiet promise shared between two hearts that had waited too long to find their way to each other. Life changed in gentle steps after Mara and Eli finally accepted their feelings for each other. They didn't rush anything. They didn't try to create some perfect picture of what a couple should be. Instead, they learned each other's habits, fears, and joys the way one learns the rhythm of a slow, beautiful song, one note at a time. Soon, the whole town knew they were together. Some people smiled kindly at them, happy to see Eli with someone who brought quiet warmth to his life. Others stayed curious, whispering behind hands. But Eli never let any of that get in the way. He held his head high, walked proudly beside Mara, and made it clear to everyone that she was an important part of his world. And slowly, Mara began to believe it too. She started spending more time at the ranch. At first, she came only for work, as she always had. But soon, she stayed for dinner, then for long evenings talking on the porch. And eventually, she stayed for whole days without even noticing how much time had passed. The ranch felt peaceful, open fields, soft breezes, warm sunsets that colored the sky with gold and orange. It was a place where she could breathe easily, where she didn't need to hide her tall frame or worry about harsh stares. One evening, after a long day fixing a broken gate, Eli wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at her thoughtfully. "You know," he said, "this place feels different since you've been around." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Eli smiled. A quiet, genuine smile that always softened her heart. Warmer. Like a home again. Mara looked away, embarrassed but touched. "You make it feel safe," she murmured. They fell into a comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the rustle of grass, the gentle snorts of horses in the barn, the soft whistle of the wind. It felt natural, like they had shared this space for years. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Their bond grew stronger, steadier. They talked more openly, trusted more deeply, and leaned on each other in ways neither had thought possible. But with growth comes change. And one day, Eli decided to take a step Mara never expected. It was late afternoon, with the sun low and warm. They were sitting on the porch, sharing slices of freshly baked bread Mrs. Turner had sent over. Eli cleared his throat, looking unusually nervous. "Mara," he said, "there's something important I want to ask you." Mara set down her bread, her heart thumping. "What is it?" Eli took a deep breath. "You've become a part of my life in a way I didn't think possible. You've brought light into this ranch. You've brought peace into my days. And He paused, searching for the right words. "I can't imagine my future without you in it." Mara felt warmth spread through her chest. "Eli." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. Not fancy, not polished, just simple and handmade, like everything else he cared about. Mara inhaled sharply as he opened it to reveal a modest silver ring. "I know life hasn't always been kind to you," he said softly. "But if you'll let me, I want to be the one who stays, the one who supports you, the one who walks beside you through everything. Will you marry me?" Mara's breath trembled. She had never imagined someone wanting her forever. She had expected temporary kindness, temporary comfort, temporary companionship. But forever? That was something she never thought she deserved. I don't know how to be a wife," she whispered honestly. Eli nodded, his voice steady. "I don't need you to know everything. We'll learn together, the same way we've learned everything else." Tears filled Mara's eyes. She looked at the ring, simple yet beautiful, and felt her heart swell with something strong and real. "Yes," she said in a shaky voice, "I'll marry you." Eli let out a breath of relief and slipped the ring onto her finger. It wasn't perfect. It was slightly too tight, but it fit her in all the ways that mattered. He leaned close, resting his forehead gently against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for choosing me," she replied. The wedding came a few months later. It was a small ceremony on the ranch, attended by neighbors and a few townspeople who genuinely cared about them. "Missus," Turner cried louder than anyone, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. The pastor spoke simply. The wind rustled through the fields, and the horses in the barn gave soft, approving snorts, as if they understood the importance of the day. Mara wore a plain white dress, not fancy, not elaborate. It was sewn by Mrs. Turner, who had worked tirelessly to adjust it to Mara's height, smiling proudly each time a stitch came out right. Eli wore his cleanest shirt and boots, his hair neatly combed for once. When they exchanged vows, Eli took Mara's hands carefully in his. "I promise to walk beside you," he said softly, "in every step you take." Number 4. End quote. Mara's voice trembled as she replied, "I promise to try my best, every single day." Their first months as a married couple were full of adjustments. Mara had to learn how to share a home. She was used to moving quietly, taking as little space as possible, and keeping her things neat and hidden away. But Eli encouraged her to make the house her own. He raised shelves so she could reach them easily. He reinforced door frames so she wouldn't bump her head. He built a larger chair for her with his own hands, spending hours sanding the wood until it was smooth. "You deserve to be comfortable," he told her. Mara never knew such kindness before. Eli, in turn, learned things about Mara that made him admire her even more: how organized she was, how hard-working, how deeply she cared about the animals on the ranch. He learned she woke up early because she hated wasting daylight. He learned she hummed quietly when she was happy. He learned that she needed reassurance sometimes, not because she was weak, but because she had lived too long without support. Whenever she seemed unsure, he reminded her gently, "We'll figure it out together." One evening, as they were cleaning the kitchen after dinner, Mara knocked a saucepan off the counter. It clattered loudly across the floor. Startled, she froze, her body tense. "I'm sorry," she blurted quickly. "I didn't mean to." Eli stepped forward and lifted her chin with gentle hands. "Mara," he said softly, "you don't need to apologize for every small thing. This is your home too." She swallowed hard, touched by his patience. "I'm just still learning." "That's all right," he replied. "I'll guide you." Those same words spoken months earlier still carried the same strength. Life began to settle into a peaceful routine. They woke early, worked side by side, shared meals, and rested together at the end of the day. Sometimes, Mara still felt a flicker of fear. Fear of doing things wrong. Fear of not being enough. But Eli was always there with quiet reassurance. And the fear slowly faded. One cool, clear night, months after their wedding, they stood near the fence, looking out at the horizon. The stars sparkled above them, bright and endless. The air carried the smell of grass and earth. Eli wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You're different now," he said gently. Mara looked up at him. "Different how?" "You walk with confidence," he replied. "You smile more. You look comfortable." Mara thought about that. She wasn't the same lonely woman who walked into Larkspur with her suitcase. She wasn't the shadow who kept her head down, afraid to be seen. She wasn't someone living quietly on the edges of life. She was part of something now. "I feel different," she admitted. Eli kissed the top of her head softly. "That's all I ever wanted." They stood together in silence, watching the stars. The pain of unfamiliarity, the ache of stepping into a new life, the fear of being loved, the weight of learning to trust, had slowly transformed into comfort. Not sudden, not dramatic, just steady, patient comfort. Mara rested her head against Eli's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his presence. She had found a home. She had found a partner. She had found a life she never believed she could have. And Eli, true to his quiet promise, continued to guide her not because she was weak, not because she needed fixing, but because love meant walking together, side by side, through every season of their shared life.